Okay, it's time to create another user account, but I swear this one's going to be different. If you've been working in cloud for a while, you've probably heard the term that IAM is the new perimeter. And what we mean by this is that you should be focusing more on identity management as your defenses rather than focusing on the network first. Now, here's the reason why, because this can become a little bit confusing for people the first time you start getting into it. If you think about it, everything we've done so far in our labs in Amazon, we've been accessing Amazon over the internet, and we've been using different kinds of credentials, mostly usernames and passwords and multi-factor authentication. Well, this is how everything in the cloud is managed. So for all the fundamental administrative functions down to root for your entire organization are all managed over the internet through standard web portals and standard API calls. And this is true across all the different cloud providers. That's why identity management becomes so important. Because one of the things that we've learned is that the attackers really focus on grabbing that identity because that allows them to get into the management plane. And that effectively gives them administrative rights to your fundamental infrastructure. I've got a phrase for this that I've used, that all cloud native security failures are IAM failures, and also that all identity management failures are governance failures. We'll get into the governance stuff later. Okay, with that said, one of the things that becomes a problem is if you think about everything we've done so far in our AWS account, we're logging into the portal and we've been creating new sets of credentials. You have your root account user, and we also have for me, it's my RMogul user, my administrative user. Then we learn how to switch roles to jump into accounts. So everything we've done is within the constraints of what you can do with kind of that native Amazon users and roles. Now, that was a great start, but if you're in a larger organization, and honestly, it doesn't even need to be that much larger, it just needs to be a little bit larger. But if you're in one of those larger organizations, then you're going to have hundreds, thousands, tens, or hundreds of thousands of users that need access to dozens or even hundreds of different cloud services and thousands of Amazon accounts. All of a sudden, trying to manage and create new user accounts with new usernames and passwords, that's just not manageable. And this is why we have federation. Federation allows us to log in one place, and then that identity is federated out, that access is federated out. So we log in one place, and then that gives us access to all of these other services. Every one of you has used federation. If you've worked in any corporate environment, you've used it there. If you have a Twitter account or you've used Gmail, you've probably experienced federation already. Now we need to get into a little bit of the weeds in terms of how federation works. There's two main components of any federated identity system. The first is an identity provider, and that's where your user account lives, and that's where you authenticate. This is why we made such a big deal about authentication versus authorization. So the authentication, the authn, occurs in that identity provider, and that identity provider has all of the users and the groups and the attributes associated with those users. On the other side of it is a relying party. And I'm going to do a diagram in a minute to go through all of this, so you don't have to remember it all right now. But the relying party is the cloud service. In this case, today, it's going to be Amazon or your Amazon account. What happens is you log into the identity provider, and then when you go to do something in the relying party goes to the identity provider and says, hey, is Rich really logged in? And is this the Rich mogul I want to give access to? And the identity provider says yes, and then I can do my things, carry out my activities in that other service. The way this works is that you're going to build a trust relationship between that identity provider and that relying party. And the names make it clear. Hey, I've got all the identities. I'm going to tell you, yeah, it's cool. You can trust that I've taken care of making sure that this person is who they say they are. Another name for this that you've probably heard is single sign-on. With single sign-on, federation is one of the most common ways of doing that. You sign in once to a portal, and they can just click to all the different services you want to drop into. And that's very commonly used in all of these, in pretty much any work environment, and even some people's personal environments. Okay, now, federation in cloud and over the internet is based on a set of standards. And there's a few standards you just need to hear the names of today. I'm not going to go into the details of how they all work. You can look that up on Wikipedia yourself if you want, and like you want to put yourself to sleep. But it is actually kind of interesting. So the main one used in the enterprise world has historically been something called SAML, the Security Assertion Markup Language, and it uses XML and other things to establish these trust relationships. The next one is OAuth 2.0. And the third is OpenID Connect. And these are just all examples of these federation standards, and Amazon actually supports pretty much all of them. Now, the way that the federation works is, and again, I'm going to go in through the diagram, walk through the process, but basically, the standards use different kinds of cryptography. And so there's digital certificates that are involved, and people digitally signing messages, not people, systems, digitally signing messages back and forth. And that's kind of the heart of how this works. Let's go ahead and take a look. So let's drop over to the whiteboard. I'm going to grab my iPad here. And the diagram you see here is very simple, and it's not any of these specific standards. It's kind of an amalgamation, a combination of a few of the different standards. So I did it this way just to simplify, but they all kind of work in generally this same way. So let's start off with, I'm the user here, and I want to go ahead and access an Amazon account. So I'm going to go ahead and try to access that account. Oops, let me go ahead and do a different color here to make it a little more obvious. There we go. And so my first step is I go, hey, let me in. Well, that relying party, the first thing it needs to do is figure out, well, who are you? And so I'm requesting that access, and I'm going to usually tell them like who my identity provider is as part of that connection. Now, this is key. You have to establish ahead of time a trust relationship between the identity provider and that relying party. And usually that consists of two different kinds of things. There's going to be some configuration settings, and then the other part is those digital certificate. And those digital certs, and there might be more than one, is what they're going to use to basically cryptographically sign messages back and forth. Technically, you shouldn't be able to do any to replicate that signature on a message without having that certificate. By the way, bad guys, they love stealing these things. Just ask Microsoft, and you can look that one up later. Yeah, not going to get into it today. All right, so the first thing is I go, let me in, and then the relying party is going to say, all right, well, I'm going to have to bounce you back to your identity provider because I need something to prove you are who you say you are. All right. Now, on my identity provider, it's going to make me log in. That's the first thing. And that's the part of that auth n, which is proving I am who I say I am. Nope. Let's move that down a little bit there. All right. So assuming I've logged in, my identity provider goes, yeah, that's good. I'm going to issue you a token, and that token is going to be cryptographically signed with my digital certificate, and I'm going to redirect you back over to the relying party. The relying party has that certificate, and it doesn't need to communicate again. It's got its own copy of, it can do its own little stuff, but essentially the relying party checks that trust relationship, says, okay, I now know that that user is who they say they are, and they're going to have whatever permissions are set up on my side. And those permissions are the authorizations. And if you recall, we call that auth Z. Authorizations, auth Z. That's how you memorize that. Okay, putting that down again. So the basics of this are, in Federation, it enables single sign-on. It allows us to log into an identity provider, and then that is making assertions to all of these relying parties that I am who I say that I am. The other part of this is that when those two systems are communicating, they can also pass over some attributes. So the identity provider can say, Rich is part of the administrators group, and he signed in with MFA, and he signed in with an approved IP address. So there's all sorts of different attributes that you can go ahead. And all part of that configuration of that relationship defines what information is going to be exchanged between the two. Today, we're going to enable Federation using something called the AWS Identity Center. This is Amazon's service for Federation. Once we're in there, we're going to create an administrators group and create our own user, and then set up MFA on that user. This is going to be the third R mogul that I'm going to set up as part of these labs. You guys will do something similar with your own names, but you're going to see pretty quickly that it's different. And here's the other piece. Once we get this set up, this is going to be how we log in every single time. That's why it's all so important to get that MFA on there. So we're going to not use that admin user that we've already set up. In our next lab, we'll go ahead with assigning out permissions and access to the different accounts. It just takes a little bit of time to get through the Identity Center features. Amazon supports a wide range of federation. An example of that is when we did our switching roles, that assume role operation. That's a form of federation that's internal to AWS and isn't really scalable. Now we're going to be able to scale things out to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users we could use for our organization. I mean, you could manually do that, but it's not going to end well. And unfortunately, I've seen people that have tried to go ahead and do that. Now, Amazon natively supports SAML and OpenID Connect in your accounts. And you can manually create all sorts of different connections in individual accounts. So you could say, hey, I want to go directly from my corporate Active Directory server directly into this one Amazon account and set that up manually. Instead, though, we will use Identity Center because Identity Center is a centralized service. So all I need to do is establish that first connection between my directory and Identity Center, or I can use Identity Center as the database for my users itself, and that's how we're going to use it. Then Identity Center is enabled for Amazon organizations, so it handles all the internal connections to all the AWS accounts. So you can really think of it as a bridge from external identity into Identity Center, that's federation, and then Identity Center into all of your individual AWS accounts. That is also a version of federation. So it's just two steps. We're only going to use one step because we are going to set up our user database within Identity Center itself and then use Identity Center to give us access to all of the Amazon accounts we're going to be creating throughout all of these labs. So that's what is going to allow us to scale things out better. All right. So there's a lot of big concepts around federation and a lot of details and nuances, as well as a lot to AWS Identity Center. We're just going to go ahead and get things started, and we're going to keep coming back to this topic over time as we run through a bunch more labs to really get into the nitty-gritty of identity. With that, let's switch over, log into our console, and start the lab. Setting up Identity Center is pretty straightforward. First thing is make sure you are logged into your org management account. So that's the main account that we've been doing all of these labs in. Then I'm going to just type in Identity Center, and we're going to switch over to that service. And right here, we've got the big enable button. Now, once I click that, it's going to turn it on for my entire organization, but it's not going to have anything configured. And we'll go ahead and do our setting things up as soon as we get this set up. All right. Waiting a few moments. Da, 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 da. Okay, you can see we've got a whole ton of features that are enabled here. Now, one point that we'll get into later is that Amazon recommends you set up service control policies so nobody can set up Identity Center in their own account. And we'll get back to that later when we do some more work with our service control policies. But if you think about it, anybody who can administer an Amazon account could potentially set up Identity Center in their own account. It wouldn't override the organization one, and it would only work within Identity Center, but that's a level of confusion we don't want to get into. And because I'm in my management account, it pretty much automatically set this up for my organization. Now, here's an important thing you will need. AWS Access Portal URL. Now, notice you can edit it and change it to something more human readable that you can remember. I don't really care, but we do need to have that so that we don't forget it. I'm going to right click that, or maybe if I click it there, yeah, it's going to open it up into a separate web page. This is going to be the page that you log into from here on out. So it is very important that you keep that URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that out. That's on my clipboard. And I'm going to go and save that into probably my password manager tool or something in my browser. All right. And actually, let me go here. Yeah, that is double checking E8E. Nope. I'm going to not go ahead and bookmark this until I know for sure that's exactly where it needs to go. Okay. So I've got that copied onto my clipboard. and I have Identity Center enabled. The first thing I will do is create a group. So let's go into groups and create group. This is really very similar to what we've done before. Let's call it administrators. And this is going to be listed as full admin access. I don't have any users. I'm going to create the group first, and then I'm going to go ahead and create the user. But let's create the group. Now, before I create my user, I want to make sure I have multi-factor authentication enabled, especially because this is going to be an administrator's group. To get to that, I'm going to flip over here and click on Settings. And let me zoom out. And within Settings, I can scroll down. You'll notice we've got some identity source stuff. Right now, our identity source is set as the Identity Center directory. So that means it's built in. I could link this to an external Active Directory, Okta, Ping, whatever, Jump Cloud, whichever one of those tools that you're using. We're not going to get into that today, but let's go to Authentication Settings. And we're set for, down here, we want to enable multi-factor authentication. I'm going to click on Configure. And when do I want to prompt users for MFA? So I prefer to set this up for every time somebody signs in. I've actually worked places where they set it up so only if your context changes, like you're switching to a different computer. To me, I don't think that's secure enough, especially for administrative access. And right now, we're still doing everything at full admin. So let's go with every time they sign in. And then what authentication types are supported? The first one here is hardware authentication tokens. I actually have one of those. I have a YubiKey, and maybe in a later lab we'll do that. Hey, YubiKey, if you're listening, please sponsor. Kidding. No, I'm not. Or authenticator apps. Authenticator apps is what we've used, but I want to allow both of them. If you're going to turn one off, usually you're going to turn off authenticator apps, and you're going to let people use those more secure physical keys. And then here's the key one. If a user does not have a registered MFA device, require them to do that at sign-in. You don't want to be trying to assign these out to people yourself. You'll go ahead and require them to register that MFA device the very first time they sign in. And that's how we've got our MFA set up here. And I'm going to click Save Changes. Okay, so we should have that all set up. Now we're going to go ahead and create our user. And shocker here, I'm going to create my RMogul user yet again. I'm just kind of curious if any of you have actually set up an RMogul user. Go ahead and drop me an email, but please don't do that. It'll be confusing. Okay, so let's do RMogul plus S.L.A.W SSO at securosis.com. So that's going to be the address that I'm going to use for this. Now all you bad guys know where to, oops, there's no period at the end of that. Now all you attackers know what to go ahead and try and do your phishing attacks on. All right, and we'll confirm my email address, put in my name. And if you go down all these optional areas, this is the kind of stuff you would expect from an enterprise directory. What's their phone number, job roles, user types, titles, organization, all of those kinds of things. We're not going to worry about any of that. We're not even going to do the additional attributes. In this case, has something to do with Microsoft 365. Why would that be there? Well, it's because you can use Identity Center to actually log into other applications. Federation is federation. We're just created an identity provider, and we can connect this in through standards to lots of different relying parties. All right, I'm going to click Next for that user and add user to the group, administrators. Hopefully everybody's doing the same thing at home. Click Next. And then I do my review and add user. Now, this is the important part. Let me zoom up to the top. The user will receive an email with a link to set up password and instructions on how to connect. And I'm going to wait a moment here and just go ahead and pause the video while I go check my email. The email actually came in pretty quick, and I will have to go ahead and accept this invitation. This is really key, making sure that you keep track of this URL. You'll notice when I click on it, as I showed you before, it's going to switch to a different one that doesn't bookmark as well. I like to copy this one out and then make a bookmark directly from it in my browser. And let's go ahead and accept that invitation. And go to Firefox, which is what I use for these labs. All right, so I've got to create my password. I'm going to pause again and set my new password. Okay, I have my password set, so let's go ahead and set that. And I don't store it there. So what I did is I actually put that in my password manager with the URL that will go ahead and log me in. And that way I just need to click it in my password manager and it'll drop me right to the portal here. Okay, so I've got my username. Let me paste in that password. Not now. And now I've been directed for my MFA. We'll go ahead and use the Authenticator app like we've done before. Click that. Go to next. And I'm going to pause as I go through this, the rest of this process, since I don't want to be showing the QR code or anything else on the screen. Okay, my Authenticator app is all set up and registered. And let me click done. Redirecting, and I don't have any applications. Well, folks, that's as far as we're going to get this week. We've got everything set up. We have our Identity Center enabled. We create our first user. We create our administrators group. Next week, we're going to learn how to actually give permissions. You'll notice we called the group administrators. We didn't actually assign it administrator permissions. We're going to give it permissions, and then we're going to show how to map that administrator into our individual accounts. And we only have like 2 accounts to set that up with, but we'll go ahead and do that. Once we do that, we'll be all set up and we'll be running out of Identity Center for the rest of the time we're using these labs. That's it. Have a great week.